Recent accolades for Ottawa's decision to disallow a Chinese state-owned enterprise's bid for Canadian construction giant Aecon are justified. But the real takeaway is that Ottawa's policy on national security and foreign investment is an opaque and confusing mess. Consider not just the Aecon deal, but 3 other Chinese companies and their Canadian activities. Chinese telecoms giant Huawei was founded by a former engineer in the People's Liberation Army of China and has been singled out as a noteworthy cybersecurity risk in congressional testimony by the heads of the CIA, the FBI, the National Security Agency, and the Defense Intelligence Agency in the United States. Of particular concern to those charged with protecting American national security has been the prospect that Huawei equipment might be integrated in the next generation of Internet 5G wireless networks that will be ubiquitous in cities within a few years. Even with extensive testing, it can often be difficult to understand the nature and function of every line of software or every piece of hardware in these systems. Yet the criticism of Chinese state-owned enterprises that is increasingly heard throughout Western capitals is that they are not legitimate commercial enterprises, but rather unapologetic agents of the Chinese state and, even more worryingly, of the Communist Party of China. While Ottawa is being a bit coy about the exact nature of the national security concerns that led to the rejection of the Aecon deal, the Prime Minister did make explicit reference to the Australian government balking at the idea of Chinese state-owned enterprises building vital national infrastructure like electricity grids. Who knows what surveillance or even sabotage functions might be built into such networks by a Chinese state who must consider that Western governments might eventually become potential or actual military adversaries. If an Aecon under Chinese state-owned enterprise control building Canadian infrastructure caused Ottawa national security heartburn, you'd think that having Huawei at the heart of building the backbone of our most sensitive communications infrastructure would cause major gastroenteritis. Not a bit of it. Public Safety Minister Ralph Goodale seems very sanguine, telling journalists last March that an eye is being kept on Huawei and it does not pose a national security threat to Canadians. I'm glad he thinks so. His optimism is not shared by Ward Elcock, John Adams, and Richard Fadden, all former heads of the main agencies charged with this country's national security, including CSIS, CSE, and the Department of National Defense, and others. Every one of them has gone on the record warning against allowing Huawei to play any role in the development of this sensitive communications infrastructure. Not only has this not produced decisive action, Huawei is increasingly deeply embedded in the entire research and rollout effort for Canada's emerging 5G network. Then there was last year's purchase by China's Hytera of Vancouver-based Norsat International. The Trudeau government didn't consider this deal even worthy of a proper national security review, even though, according to one report, and I quote, Canada and many of its allies use the company's patented satellite communications technology for security, public safety, and defense. Those allies include the United States, who were not amused to learn that one of their suppliers was now controlled by a nation whose companies are notorious for filching intellectual property that ends up in the hands of the state, and whose corporate structure must give the paramount leadership role to cells of the Communist Party of China. The government decided to forego a full national security review of this purchase, exactly the kind of review that caused them to have second thoughts about the Aecon transaction. In doing so, they went against the advice of Elcock and Fadden, both of whom argued that a deal like this merited a full national security analysis. Finally, also last year, Ottawa approved the sale of Montreal-based ITF Technologies, thereby reversing a veto of that transaction by the previous government on the grounds that it would reveal to the Chinese authorities military technologies that advantage the West. If the Aecon decision signals an increased and justified skepticism by Ottawa vis-à-vis China and its intentions towards the West in general and towards Canada in particular, that's a very welcome development. But when this government's national security decisions on Chinese activities since coming to office are taken together, the pattern is alarming rather than reassuring. If the government is serious now about protecting the security of Canadians in the face of explicit Chinese plans to use their country's companies to advance Beijing's interests, they need to make clear and explicit this change of heart. One way of doing this would be to make a full national security review compulsory and not optional whenever Chinese activities in Canada impinge on the safety and security of Canadians, and to be as forthcoming as possible about the conclusions of the security review once completed. The security of Canadians can never be for sale.